evening, primetime partiers. It's primetime party time. Welcome back to our hour of all things media and entertainment, live on the air at 9 p.m. at ptptshow.com and on your time, wherever you stream podcasts. Tonight, we are going to go back in time and back to the Sopranos era, but in 1967 to cover the Many Saints of Newark. So we're going to compare and contrast with the show, kind of pick up our kind of highs and lows from the film, and see if this is something that should fit in your prime time queue. So if you woke up this morning and thought you're going to have yourself time, you're going to have yourself a primetime party time with Many Saints of Newark. Daniel, how you doing?
Great intro, as always, Tracy. I'm excited. This is one of the top rated series of all time.
Oh, yeah.
One of our guests' favorite series of all time.
It is my favorite show, and I think it is the number one show, number one performance. It wins best show.
And those words you're hearing of quite strong Sopranos encouragement is coming from listener, regular, and boyfriend of the host, Sean.
Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, there's no one who could talk Sopranos more, and frankly, in our downtime, there's probably, 18 to 20 hours of just conversations I could have recorded for the podcast. So we are very prepared for this show without really trying.
Stoked to get an hour of that on here.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. Without any further ado, we didn't have much of a toast and roast for this week because we know we have a lot of ground to cover with this show. So I think we should go over a little bit what got you into The Sopranos, Sean? What is your history with this show?
I first saw The Sopranos when I was in third grade. My mom really liked the show, and I don't know, I always thought it was interesting, her fascination with Tony, because she thought Tony was sexy, which I thought was interesting. And I was like, why is this fat bald guy sexy? And I remember just watching it, and I just was like fascinated by it from a young age, because I had never seen those type of characters on screen before, like as a main character.
Right.
And there's one episode called College in season 1, episode 5, where Tony kills like this FBI informant while he's visiting colleges with his daughter. And like a lot of shows I watch, like they're always different after time passes. But when I watch The Sopranos, like it's exactly how I remember when I go back to it, which is like, I think kind of separates it from a lot of other shows. So
Yeah,
I'm a big fan.
You're a big fan. And Daniel, what's your history with the show?
Yeah, Sopranos was on a bit before I was like paying attention to this type of television, but there was a kid in the neighborhood who would essentially come over all the time, and he would weight train for high school. And so he was like 5 or 6 years older than the rest of us, and he'd come over, and my dad had like a weight set that he was storing for one of his friends or something like that. And so he'd just be pumping iron in the garage, and then he'd stay a little extra one night a week to watch The Sopranos, because, they didn't have HBO at the house that he was at. And so he'd always just like stay. And so I kind of saw the series through the lens of like when he was over and what they would be talking about either in the garage before episodes or right after episodes before he was running home. Him and my parents would always kind of have, like, he was their son for those couple hours, and they'd always kind of have these discussions. And so I do recall vividly all of the major moments of the show just through their conversations. And I do recall, especially in the final season, because it was airing at the point where I was sort of watching HBO shows at that point. I did watch a good amount of the last season live. and definitely saw the finale live and remember that. Interestingly enough, he on the flip side of that, I would go over to his house because the Grand Theft Auto back then wasn't allowed in my house, and there was some cast overlap. Specifically, one of the major characters of the Grand Theft Auto series back in those days in GTA 3 was a character named Salvatore Leone, who was kind of the mob boss of that game. He's played by Frank Vincent, who I believe plays a character named Phil on The Sopranos.
Phil
And so,
Leotardo.
yes, he's Phil Leotardo in the voice, and he's a legendary, kind of mob actor. The overlap was hard not to pay
Yeah.
attention to. So yeah, Tracy, did you grow up with The Sopranos?
So, I did not grow up with The Sopranos. It should be noted that my household was like so not into any sort of dramas. Like I think up until think the first drama like my parents watched that I watched with them was 24. So
Good
like
choice.
until then it was strictly comedy. Like maybe there would be like action movies, but no like straight kind of like this sort of show. And they didn't have HBO either. So that just didn't happen. I watched The Sopranos because I had never watched it before. And Sean was like, this cannot do. So,
We must watch it.
so yeah, so I had to watch it. And I do really like it. I mean, there are straight up episodes that have traumatized me. Like I definitely it is not so much for the fainter, lighter heart. Even though I've watched some other intense shows, I think this one kind of and this is true for the movie as well, when they do have these scenes, they're all kind of things that do happen. I think that's why it's scarier than, as someone who definitely falls into the supernatural verse of shows where there's definitely equal to, if not more violence, but like for some reason, like, vampire slaying, there's just like a degree of like separation than, the gang violence that very much does happen
Yes,
in
the
everyday
mob.
life.
The mob does exist.
Well, like, and even less so with that, I think it's just like seeing that sort of thing. And for the movie itself, too, it's more of a political, historical moment that a lot of this stuff is happening. And since I think they definitely chose to release it with a little bit of the mirroring of what is happening nowadays in the past few years. And it's great, but it is also kind of the disheartening seeing certain things where it's like, I think they're kind of trying to show like some of this stuff, started then. Some things have still struck a chord with people as things that need to change. So I think that's why, like, I'm saying, like, it's a traumatic movie. It's a drama for sure. You don't have as much of I think my favorite memories of rewatching the show with Sean are a lot of kind of the smaller, fluffy episodes for sure. Of just them going. They have like their spots, and what I do like about the show is that they have a very daily routine of like they get their espressos and their cold cuts, the sandwich shop.
Gabagool.
Yeah, they gotta get their gabagool. And then they
Yeah, the
gotta like
gabagool.
and then they like mosey on down to like whatever warehouse they're working out of. And then it's like late at night, gotta get the ziti out of the fridge and just like eat it straight cold. And there's moments like that. And I think also the fact that he's like actively working on himself is one where you're like, yeah, they definitely mark this show in like media TV history as a bit, not like the birth, but one of the most popularized like beginnings of the anti-hero as the main character in a show. And he's definitely one where it's like you both root for him and then you also are afraid of him
Yeah.
equally so. And you're kind of hoping he'll turn the car around, and he really, tends to just, leave the car on the side of the road and blow it up instead.
Yeah.
So that is more the Tony style. But yeah, now that we've gone over our histories of what we've experience with the show, prior to the movie, we'll take just a short break before we get into how and why we watched the movie and the similarities and differences between the movie and the show. So, Sean, how did we watch this movie? How did we do?
So what I liked is I knew it was streaming on HBO. So it's streaming on HBO for the first 30 days. And you can also see it in theaters. And I wanted to see it in theaters. So we went to like a nice theater with like the lazy boy chairs and we saw it. And that was nice because I hadn't been to the movies in a while.
Yeah.
And like, the movie is not going to be sold out. So because no one goes to the movies anymore.
That's really cool.
This is true. It's we still got our tickets ahead of time because we've learned the lesson of not doing that and then being in the front row.
Yeah.
But it also is an extremely empty theater. So
wasn't that empty though.
It could have been emptier. It's true.
Yeah.
Like I think towards there's a lot of people where you could see they just last minute were like, you know what, let's just go see it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people showing up in sweatpants like 5 minutes before the movie started. This wasn't part of their plan. They got dragged. Yeah. But no, it was very nice.
And I had my wine. I had my 2 glasses of red wine.
Nice.
Which I needed for the movie.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, because Sean likes to note that wine is a big part of the Sopranos.
Wine plays a big part of the Sopranos.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Because they're always eating and they're always drinking wine.
Yeah.
Though I will say in this movie, there was less of the wholesome mealtime. Like most of the meals were happening at people's funerals. That was the majority.
There's one confirmation, meal, but yes, yeah, I guess, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. They had the one confirmation party that was like actually at an Italian restaurant, similar to like that one Italian restaurant that they frequent in the show. It's that guy
Artie Bucco.
Yeah, Artie Bucco and his wife.
So I believe Artie Bucco made a brief appearance.
Very brief.
Yeah. I think in the back of the car when he's with Dickie Moltisanti, that's Artie Bucco.
Oh.
I think so. But yeah, there was less of the big Italian meals. And I give the movie a 7 out of 10 from when I saw it.
Okay, a bit low from a fan standpoint, or is that pretty fair? Like,
what's a 10 for you?
What's a 10 for you? Yeah,
so a 10 for me is the show. A 10 out of 10 for me is the show.
Like most of the show.
The vast majority of the show, I would call it a 10 out of 10 because it is my favorite show, and like literally every episode, I enjoy.
Okay.
And like just all aspects of the show. Like I like the writing, I like the acting, I like the atmosphere. I like how they, yeah.
And one thing that Sean mentioned off air is that it is like a big all-star team, and kind of the sum is better than the parts, because we have, people like the Mad Men creator as a major writer. And who else did you list was part of the team?
Matthew Weiner, the guy who created Mad Men, was a writer on the show. Terrence Winter was a writer on the show. The guy who did Dexter was a writer on the show. The main writer is David Chase.
So this is a lot of good writers on the team.
Yeah. So I feel like when I look at The Sopranos, like it's really everything came together at the right point in time. Like David Chase was a really good writer, and then James Gandolfini just happened to be really good. I feel like everything kind of happened at the right moment for the show to be so good, because it's not just as good as David Chase is. I feel like this movie was really just David Chase. And it's a movie. I feel like he's more made for, he's done television for the majority of his career, and he's 78 now. He's only done television, and this is his second movie.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
So, like, My view on it is I think The Sopranos is like so intricate and complex, and like it's really about like depression, death, like the human condition. It's layered. And then I think this movie it's just
Less
a gangster.
layered.
It's a gangster film. It's a gangster film. Like the shootout was cool, but and I think they probably wanted to make it so it was different.
Yeah.
But I just wish I'd seen like a few things that reminded me of the Sopranos.
Yeah,
Um,
they definitely it's a less warm movie. Like the show has a lot of heavy moments and heavy material, but the tone stays pretty light. Like it kind of
yeah,
contrasts with the content. But the movie on the end, like both visually and what's happening, it is quite dark. They are kind of in this, you know, it's a tough time in US history. And then there's a little bit of like, the it's a little bit seeming like the people in the mob are kind of like holding on and that part could be similar to the show where they're kind of towards the end of those days and this one's kind of like them really trying to clutch to it before it changes because as you've noted, Sean, what is the very important piece of legislation that is a big part of this
so
movie and show?
so in the movie there were the '67 riots, and then in 1970 which is when the rest of the movie takes place. That's when they passed the RICO statutes, which were basically it was a racketeering law, which led to like people in the mob going to jail for like much longer periods of time. And that was kind of what broke up the mob, because that and drugs, because once these guys started getting, before the RICO statutes and them dealing drugs, a mobster would do like 5 years maybe, and like those guys could do 5 years, but once after RICO and then after them dealing drugs, they were getting like 30-year sentences, and that's when people started to flip, and that's what really broke apart the mob.
Yeah. So we're seeing in this movie is it is quite like a more horrific mob because the consequences aren't as bad. So you're definitely seeing scenes of people just um you know having a bit more just flippant killings. It's a
Yeah,
lot more like they don't think about it in the strategy as much. They're really more just like, "This person, pissed me off. I'm gonna take them out."
yeah, it really felt like it was really just what Tony does, but they were just being way less careful, because there wasn't as much like I'm sure like law enforcement wasn't what it was back then versus what it is currently.
Yeah, and you do see a bit of a lot of the riots are around police brutality, and they're kind of like the streets of Newark and like New Jersey are, kind of ablazed, and they have these scenes from that. But then also you're seeing the people in the mob that are taking advantage of kind of like the, time to like also, steal stuff. Or in the case of Dickie, he also like, whacks his dad during this time. And there are just things where you're like, wow, there's a lot going on in just one scene. Like, and,
Yeah,
and they do some fun things with that. Like, I think it's funny. One of the more humorous parts, I think, is that though it's like a very dark, humored part, is that they have this auto shop called like Attaboy, which is a lot of things that would be a typical father-son comment, and that is where the head of the mob ends up like ending his dad, and it's just like attaboy, and then it's in flames. And those are parts where you're just like, ugh. But I would say the parts that are also more interesting for The Sopranos is that, a lot of the posters you saw around were framing this movie as what made Tony Soprano. And I guess like what they're trying to show with a lot of this like really dark footage. Like the head of the mob was his uncle who really doted on him, but like this guy was also a full psychopath. Like he would just try to undo, murders and really bad deeds by like doing these weird virtuous, like altruistic acts, and there was like a big disconnect between them. And then at the same time he started to shut out Tony because he was kind of told like the best thing you can do to make sure this kid, has a good life is that he's not so close to the mob.
Yeah.
And even though it's kind of like this kind of glimmering light that shines to him, but the Tony character is played very well by James Gandolfini's son. But there are moments where you can tell, there's a specific scene with stolen JBL speakers where he's kind of on the fence of like, do I take this or not? And the head of the mob, Dickie, says, well, you could just tell yourself this is the only time I'll take something that's stolen. And you're kind of looking at from him, it's like, yeah, I don't know if you should be handing out this advice. Like clearly
Yeah.
you say that and there's like kind of a never ending gobstopper amount of stolen stuff in your pocket. But yeah, and then, he really tries to just stay out of it as much as he can. But what's kind of sad is you see like other people looking around going like, he has a lot of good potential. He might end up in this business, in this like line of work. And you're kind of like, wow, weird
Yeah.
to be scouted.
So one thing I noticed about it is in the series you kind of sympathize with Tony, and I think it's because the writing kind of plays tricks on you to make it so you sympathize with Tony. You don't actually realize that he is just as bad as all these other characters. Versus like Dickie Moltisanti, like I didn't really sympathize with him very much.
No, it's because he is too much of, honestly, like a similar character on TV now would be like the main guy in You, or just other shows about like, we're kind of like American Psycho. Like he really is, or just Psycho. He really just does kind of seem like more of a murderer than anything else, because he doesn't seem like he's that into the business, and it also just seems like he has like a flip
I don't
switch.
and like I
Like
don't know
once
what
he loses his temper, it's just like
and
you're done.
and like I don't know what his like objectives were throughout the movie. Like I feel like Tony, it's obvious what Tony's issues are. It's that it's kind of about like it kind of is about like the American dream, consumerism. He has all this power and he's trying to fill this void. And I don't and like that's why Tony keeps on like tripping over himself over and over again. But like with Dickie Moltisanti, like I didn't really know what his objectives were, like what his ultimate goals were.
And he didn't
Yeah.
really have a ton of like redeeming qualities, because they set up the Sopranos to be similar to almost like the Honeymooners, which is like an old
Mm-hmm.
classic TV show where like the husband's very portly, the wife is kind of attractive, and they kind of like, bump heads, but it's all about them kind of like getting by and being humorous about it. And that is kind of how the Sopranos family is set up. But I think like the weird part is like on the show, Tony's doing all these things to like make sure Meadow goes to college, make sure they can go to private school, make sure Carmela, can have the vacation home she wants. Like he's kind of doing he has an ends to a means and a means to an end. And on the show with this movie with Dickie, you just kind of see him loving the power and loving the violence and loving the title. And he doesn't seem like he really cares because, he has his wife, he has his guma, and he doesn't necessarily seem to be overly enamored with either of them. And he really just like wants a son, but it doesn't really seem like he wants to do much for this son. It's it's kind of just so that he can have another thing, so he can have an heir.
Yeah.
Daniel, what are your thoughts on this?
Dickie's he was an interesting character because kind of like you two said, both he and his father were just the worst as far as
Yeah.
people go. His uncle was amazing. Uncle Sal, also played by Ray Liotta, who played his father,
I
was
like I liked
Fantastic.
Ray Liotta.
He was great, and Uncle
Yeah.
Sal was a really interesting, zenned out in prison character that I would love to see more of in any way that they would
Oh
want to give it
yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
But Dickie and Hollywood Dick were both dicks.
Yeah.
And as Dickie's story sort of unfolded, I found myself for a lot of the middle of the movie wondering, like, well, obviously the end of the movie is sort of like you know where it's going to go. You know that I don't know personally how much Dickie is referred to in The Sopranos, but I do. Oh yeah, if you want to answer that, actually.
Answer that,
He
Sean.
is. So like in that was a kind of another thing that kind of like pissed me off about the movie is there's a part where Christopher Moltisanti kills this cop.
Okay.
Because Tony takes him to see this cop. He says, "That's the person who killed your dad, Dickie Moltisanti." And
Oh.
because I was going to see this movie about Dickie Moltisanti, I was like, okay, this is going to answer the questions on who that cop was. And it didn't answer any questions about who that cop was and whether he played any role in Dickie Moltisanti's murder. But another thing I remember Tony said he was carrying TV trays when he got shot, and he was carrying TV trays.
That part is true because of the cabinet and TV trays. They kind of make a joke about that, like TV trays, But yeah, that part is weird because I guess Tony would not want to say it was Junior.
Because what happened was he goes to kill this cop, and the cop is like, "How do you know? How do you know it was me?" And Christopher Moltisanti's like, "It doesn't matter. Either way, he wants you dead." But you wish they had pointed out like who this cop was. That just kind of, but that's also just kind of how The Sopranos is. A lot of stuff is open ended and open to interpretation.
It's interesting. But yeah, going back to it, like we did know that Dickie was supposed to die in this movie. It seemed like it was going to be
that he was murdered.
So my question watching the movie was, at what point is this movie going to get me to care about Dickie? Because he sucks. He's killed his father. He kills his lover at one point. There's a lot of infidelity. Like you said, like his aspirations are all over the place, and he has these rage issues, and he couldn't mend his friendship with Harold. And there's all sorts of things where you're kind of just like, I don't really know that I care to see much of like where this character goes, or that I think that their journey is going to be tragic. I do think that this movie makes a massive accomplishment in flipping how you expect that to happen. I actually did feel like his death was tragic because you get Tony so much in the third act being such a confused teenager of why Dickie is neglecting him and ignoring him after Dickie's been advised to, as sort of like this is what's good for this kid. And so Tony never getting that truth, and Dickie never being able to have that conversation and come clean, make amends, and Tony having to sort of like connect the dots in whatever way he ends up connecting the dots. I thought that was a really cool way to make a character who was not really headed towards anywhere tragic at all, to make their death somewhat tragic. I was like, oh, I did care about that at the end. That was cool.
Because you could tell that Tony cared about Dickie Moltisanti.
Yes.
So I feel like you sympathize with Dickie through Tony.
A little bit. He probably sees a little bit of himself in there, even though it's probably like those are maybe the worst parts of yourself. Though he was very nice to Tony when they were in contact. So you can see the kind of doting uncle aspect, but it also it's sullied by the fact that he says he does all these things kind of to be like, I need to do good deeds, and it's very much a transactional kind of behavior of I do something really bad, I do something good, and it cancels it out when it's like, that's not exactly how that works. And ironically, the uncle in jail who brings up all of the Buddhist stuff is like, yeah, that really is not how that works.
Yeah.
By the way.
That might not be one of God's favorite things. Yeah, that was great. Or what you do might not be God's favorite things. Uncle Sal was great.
It's a great line of like, he's like, I do all these things, da, 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 and he's like, the things you love to do might not be God's favorite. And I was just like,
Yeah.
ooh, yeah, I think so. Like, it's pretty
Or
easy to see. But I think, yeah, like an interesting part you also see just like kind of bigger picture is and going back to like why they kind of say how this shaped him, it's like you do kind of see a bit more of the origin story of like why people chose to do organized crime, even though it's not always a choice, as you're seeing kind of with Tony growing up around it, but that you're seeing a lot of disenfranchised communities going like the way that they raise up in the ranks when like a lot of the system is working against them is to kind of do these, high risk, high reward type careers because they kind of see it as the real world, quote unquote, being not so different and doing kind of like the nuclear family part, like they have that somewhat in common. That part isn't quite as disintegrated as you would see from other sort of like narrative series length TV shows. This one is weirdly enough about kind of, the show Sopranos is about him maintaining that same family life while his work life contradicts it in a lot of ways. And that is one of the few parallels you see is that Dickie's trying to do like the same thing of like, I will still be a good husband, a good boyfriend, and a good father by making sure everyone's set up in their own way while I go about my murderous and fraudulent businesses. But Sean, what's like
um,
a favorite character slash moment that from the movie that you want to bring up?
so I did like Polly. I did like the guy who played Polly Walnuts. Um, I thought the guy who played Sylvia was a little over the top. I still think he did a good job. I think he did as good of a job as he could, but like Silvio's so cartoonish that like I think the performance was a little over the top, but I wish I had seen a little bit more Polly. And then what got me really excited when the movie started was when they were past it when they were in the graveyard, and it totally
Mm.
looked like New Jersey. It totally looked like a scene from The Sopranos, from all the funerals they go to. And I thought it was cool how when they passed each tombstone, you could hear the person who died was talking. And when they passed Chris Moltisanti's, like I thought it would have been really cool if they had done like some sort of dream sequence with that, like they had done in the show, because those were some of my favorite episodes. But like, so I remember like I really enjoyed the intro, and I got really into it, but then I kind of got lost on. I kind of lost interest as it just kind of talked about Dickie. So
The weird part of that scene, that's the intro scene, is it's very similar to like the Haunted Mansion ride
no, so
at Disneyland, but
what it
it is done very well.
so what it reminds me of, a lot of these dream sequences in The Sopranos, it reminds me of like A Christmas Carol.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
also
like
true.
there's a scene where Tony's in this hotel and he meets his like old he's asleep in this hotel and he's having a dream, and he sees his old coach from
Mm.
from high school, and they have like this long back and forth about how Tony secretly wanted to be a coach, like a sports coach, but instead he ended up, according to the coach, saying he took the easy way out by joining the mob.
Okay, so when you say dream sequences, are they similar to the movie does something very interesting where in the beginning it does sort of like transcend reality in the way that Christopher talks to you. But at the
Yeah,
Yeah,
end, there is sort of that like kind of pinky promise handshake that
yeah.
or pinky shake, I guess, that Tony and Dickie do while Dickie is dead in his casket. And that seemed like that
yeah.
was bending reality in a way that no other shot in the film did. Is that kind of what The Sopranos does in those or in any way? Or is that
I
kind of
think
new?
they do this in another part in the movie. And in the show, I would say they do this a bit less, with the exception of like coma dreams and other things like that. But there is the moment too where they show the diner where Tony's shot at the end of this series, and him kind of walking into it as a teenager, and they do a bit of like a, what's the word? Multi-exposure multi-exposure filming, so that you're kind of seeing like his past and current self in there. So they did like to do some meta aspects. And yes, you're also hearing hound of the show, Chibi, chime in with her thoughts. Chibi, did you like this interpretation of The Sopranos?
She enjoyed it.
Did you enjoy it a lot, Chibi?
Uncharacteristically strange night for a young dog in Southern California.
We are having many a rainstorm, so that you may hear some howling about.
Fitting for us talking about graveyard scenes and
Yes.
whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, where it is quite, they do a bit of stormy sequences. You actually don't see a ton of like sunshiny days throughout this film, and I think they do that on purpose to be like, yeah, other than like the confirmation launch, like there's
Yeah,
most of it is kind of like the haze of like the fire bombings, and then like just dreary, the day that Guma gets drowned in the ocean is a gray day. It's they don't really, they keep it pretty bleak.
and some of my favorite stuff from The Sopranos was when it's snowing. Like there's an episode called Pine Barrens where Chris and Paulie get lost in the forest. And there's all this forest in New Jersey that you can film all this, that have some really cool scenes, and like they didn't really do any of that in the movie. And like I kind of wish I had seen some of that.
Yeah, and that's also one of the more comedic sequences, isn't that? Aren't they chasing someone in a way that they're kind of winded or something? I don't know. I feel like
In
that's
Pine Barrens.
Yes, yeah.
Basically, so they go to pick up money from this Russian guy, and they're just supposed to pick up the money, but Paulie just starts talking shit to the Russian guy.
Right.
So they end up beating him up, and they think they kill him, and then they take him to Pine Barrens, which is like the forest in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And it's snowing, and they take him there thinking he's dead, but it turns out he didn't die. And then they take him out there, and then the guy escapes.
Oh my God.
He escapes, and then Paulie and Chris end up getting stuck in the forest, and it's just super, and it's super funny because they lose the car, and then they never find the Russian guy. And then and then the series just never answers what happened to him, which is like
he just gets out.
Yeah. So my theory is that here's what happened.
Okay.
So he hits Christopher over the head with the shovel. He runs away, and he does get shot, and he gets wounded. But then he climbs up a tree.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think he did.
Okay.
So he climbs up a tree, and then Chris and Paulie pass him. He climbs back down the tree. He steals their car. He takes the money. The money's in the car. And then he just leaves for Russia. Then he just bails and goes back to Russia.
Yeah.
That's what I think happens.
Is that what you do? That's
yeah, because I feel like he's like I'm probably not going to be able to face the whole mob.
Yeah.
Probably just go back to Russia.
Sounds so. Paulie, Christopher, they're big characters. Who is your favorite Sopranos character?
So Tony's my favorite by far.
Okay.
But he is the main character. I think Paulie, I'd say probably then Paulie or Silvio.
Okay.
And I feel like Paulie's like a cartoon, just like all his like expressions, the way he moves he does this a lot with his hands. And I feel like Paulie just had a lot of range as an actor. Like he could be sad, he could be happy, he could be angry.
As a kid who understood that this show was killing off characters like no other show I was experiencing at the time, I was always rooting for Paulie just based on his mannerisms and his presence on screen. I do recall, I was like, this is the one guy I want to get out. Sil as well, though I don't think Sil does.
So Sil ends up in a coma in the last season, and Paulie actually is kind of the last man standing by the end of it.
Wow. All right. Good for Paulie.
The theory is that Paulie and Patsy whacked Tony.
Is that so?
That's the theory.
What evidence goes into that theory?
So there's an episode in the last season where Tony almost whacks Paulie. So they find a body that they both killed. Of a guy they killed in like the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So they go to Florida. They go to Florida. They leave Jersey until things cool off. And Tony notices that like Paulie just won't shut up. Paulie talks a lot. And like Tony starts to think of Paulie as a liability. And there's a period where he takes Paulie out on this boat and he almost whacks him on the boat. He's like contemplating whether or not he should whack Paulie because he's got a big mouth and he's a liability. But he doesn't. And then Paulie gets suspicious and sees that Tony no longer trusts him. So the theory is that Paulie sees that Tony sees him as a liability, and then he colludes with Patsy to get Tony whacked.
Oh,
I see. The idea is that it's at the last episode, it's Tony getting shot, but it's from his perspective.
Right.
Like he doesn't even see it coming. The light, like he looks up, he sees Meadow, and then he doesn't even realize it just goes black because he's dead.
Yeah, I believe David Chase has come out at some point in like a more recent interview in the previous years and kind of alluded to that's definitely what's happening.
Yeah,
because that was kind of like a big finale in its day. That was sort of I know like my household was just like processing that.
I remember watching it and I remember being kind of pissed off, but now when I go back and I listen to like all the analysis, it's like it's kind of a genius ending.
Yeah. So you didn't like the finale for like a good amount of time?
When I saw it, I didn't really like it how it ended.
Right,
it was
jarring.
just confusing to me. I was in high school.
Yeah.
And it was confusing to me, but then looking back on it, I think it's like the best ending you could have possibly done because it has so many interpretations. Like Meadows' boyfriend Noah could have whacked Tony. Fury, it could have been Furio. Like Furio comes back and whacks Tony, then him and Carmela ride off into the sunsets. I like the idea of like really it's just that's just the moment Tony like just loses his soul. Like he can't, like that's David Chase just saying like he can't be changed. Like fuck off. Like don't. It's over. Like what do you want to watch him like keep doing these bad things over and over again? Like he can't be changed. He can't be helped. It's done.
Wow.
But yeah.
So but you still subscribe to the Paulie and Patsy one?
I think Paulie and Patsy colluded to have Tony whacked because there's a scene at the end where it's Paulie's last scene, and Patsy already doesn't like Tony because Tony had Patsy's twin brother whacked. So Patsy already is not a fan of Tony, and basically there's a scene where Paulie and Tony are talking, and Tony wants to give Paulie the Esplanade, which is like their big construction business. It's like their main source of income. But Paulie doesn't want to join because everyone who is like head of that project gets whacked.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paulie's all sketched out. He's like, no, but then Tony goes, okay, well, I guess I'll just give it to Patsy then. And if you watch that scene, you look at Paulie's face, you can tell he's like, oh shit. Like if Tony gives this job to Patsy, Patsy's probably not going to go through with the whacking of Tony. And at that point, Paulie agrees to take the Esplanade job. And then Tony leaves, and then there's a part where a cat looks right at Paulie. And like before, they had another conversation where like Tony was like, oh, like because Paulie was like superstitious about this cat that kept looking at Christopher.
Yes, I recall that
so
too.
So he thought it was like Christopher in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And basically Tony says, like, what are you talking about? Like, he just saw a rat in the wall. That's why he keeps looking at the picture. And then after they have this conversation and Tony walks off, the cat looks right at Polly. So that's basically saying, like, Polly's the rat, Polly's the traitor. So like that's like a theory. That's like a theory.
So that's so interesting. So these are just things that the show doesn't really spell any of this out, and these are like
It
really
doesn't.
definitive
Yeah.
moments in the show. And so you kind of like garner theories and you piece together as the audience what happened. Are there other moments in this show that have these kind of instances?
Sure. So another theory is that AJ's new girlfriend played a part in Tony's whacking.
Do you subscribe to this?
Like, this one it's pretty convincing in some instances, because there's so New York, the New York Mafia at one point wanted to whack Tony.
Okay.
And AJ's girlfriend was a model, and when there's a part where New York is like talking about whacking Tony, and there's a picture of her in the back in the room, like you can see a picture that looks just like her in the room, and she's one of the only people who hears where they're going to be, because Carmela says, "Oh, we're going to Holston's tonight," which is where that's where the show ends. And some people are like, "Oh, well, she heard that they were going to be at Holston's, and then she told New York, and then New York was there to whack Tony." So that's like another theory.
That is pretty convincing, but that's still, that goes up against the theory that we actually believe. Wow. Okay. All right. I'm seeing.
Like,
oh, keep going.
Yeah. So that's like that's what I like about it, is there's so many things that are unanswered, and you can form your own interpretation on what happens. I'm trying to think of some other good theories. Did you see the episode where Carmela and Tony are broken up, and Tony shows up to that barbecue at the house when they're broken up, and Carmela and Tony kind of end up reconciling? Have you seen that episode?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but for the purposes of the story, let's go with no.
So basically, there's a character named Russ. I think his name is Russ, and he's a diplomat to the he's a diplomat to the Pope. And basically he's this very like holier than thou Italian guy. He doesn't he's really not into like the Italian stereotype that is Tony.
Okay.
So he kind of looks down on Tony, and he's Polly Walnut's dad. Oh. If you follow the clues in the show, there's a good amount of evidence that he's Polly's dad.
Wow. Okay.
Because there's a part where Polly finds out that his mom really isn't his mom. His aunt, who was a nun, was actually his mom. And when she's on her deathbed, she said, "I hooked up with this soldier and had you, and then gave you to your aunt." And this guy said he served in the episode. So you kind of put two and two together. You're like, oh, that's Polly's dad. And there's irony to it, because he's all holier than thou about like Italian stereotypes, but it turns out he produced like maybe the biggest Italian stereotype on the planet. But yeah.
Wow, that's a good one.
That is Polly Walnuts.
That's a really
But that's probably that's one of my favorite theories.
So when you said best show, you also said best performance, and so you said best character. And so we know that the best show is The Sopranos. We know the best character is Tony Soprano. That leaves best performance probably going to James Gandolfini for the sweep for you. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So what I like most about Tony is I just think he's just so likable as a character. I think he just has like so much charisma, and I think like what David Chase used to say was it's all in the eyes. Like he can do so much with a look. And I think like what David Chase would say is oftentimes like why James Gandolfini was so good is he had like in the eyes, he felt like it was the eyes of like a young boy, you know, because it's kind of like whenever Tony gets himself in these situations, he has this look of like a young, like even though he's fully grown, deep down inside he's still like this young child.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I really like about it, just how much he can do with just a look, or like when he smiles, because he rarely smiles, but when he does, it I don't know, it feels nice.
It has more significance.
Yeah.
Yeah. To see what makes him smile. Like, and it's
Yeah.
usually like these weird things like animals. Like
Yeah.
Really?
like the ducks in the pool.
So one thing I would have really liked, this would have been really cool to see, is if the series continued. I would have liked to watch the series where Tony becomes an informant, he gets off, and then he ends up in like the Ozarks in like Missouri, and he's just like an average Joe, has to like go work in a factory, and it's just like bummed the entire time. Like
That
A little Better Call
reminds
Saul
me
there.
of, yeah,
what?
exactly. Like it, like Better Call Saul. And then
Yeah.
there's an anime I haven't watched that's called like The House Husband or something, and it's about supposed to be a guy from who was formerly in the Yakuza and similarly like has to do like everyday average life.
Yeah.
And
Like
that's true. That's a good angle
I just think
for
of
that.
Tony, like I just think of if the series were to continue, just him like in like, bumfuck nowhere
Does his family get to
on
come?
like he's with his family,
his
but he
family.
like has a normal job. He like takes the bus to work, and he's just bummed out that like his mob life is over. It's done.
And in this version, does anybody ever come for him, or does he just live out the rest of his days?
I would be perfectly fine just watching him be like super pissed off that was his life now, because like
Oh.
I can watch like any scene with him. I can watch regardless of whether it's there's like a lot going on or nothing going on. Like just like the way he moves around, like him, like I could watch him sit in the living room and eat ice cream. Like those scenes are great to me.
Those are good scenes. I could see
Yeah.
him also having the like Arrested Development banana stand type deal where he just
Yeah.
like
Oh,
turns
Smidge
into
corrupt.
like a fraudulent business owner instead of,
Yeah,
instead of
like
it.
whenever he's doing anything illegal, he comes off as such a criminal, because he has this look on his face of like, oh, like I can't get caught, like when he's hiding money, or if he's trying to run away from the feds or something.
Yeah, he's not very sleek, and I guess
He is not very sleek.
that's like the very big difference between the him and like the movie with Dickie, because Dickie is very like, it's like he's fit, he's kind of like suave, he's very kind of
Yeah.
under the table. He does a lot of things to not get caught, even though his uncle points out a lot of, you know, clear plot holes in his like interesting that the person who's never worked on anything, that was their last day, was them working on a car for the first time or
Mhm.
boarding stuff up when he never uses tools. And then it's the same thing with like the girlfriend passing. He's like, oh, it's interesting that all of this tragedy is just linked to you.
Uncle Sal was the best.
Hmm.
And speaking of Uncle Sal, Just the Facts says to Sean's version of the alternate ending of The Sopranos, alternate continuing seasons of The Sopranos, that sounds like the end of Goodfellas, which did feature Ray Liotta. I believe Frank Vincent as well.
What happened at the end of Goodfellas? Oh yeah, he becomes an FBI informant. That's
You do
about
like Goodfellas, so that
well,
might
that's
have just
about
that might been an idea that just like popped in there and was like, what if we just put them together?
yeah.
Hey.
Well, that's about
No one's mad.
Goodfellas is about Henry Hill, and he was an associate of the mob. He wasn't actually a maid. He wasn't a maid member of the mob.
Oh, right.
Uh, Unlike all of the characters we watch, and I will say on performances, I did really like watching Leslie Odom Jr. in this movie playing Harold.
Harold was an interesting character.
I thought he was good. I thought Harold was good.
Is Harold alluded to in the show at all? I know that he gets kind of like a post credits coda.
No, really. I feel like in the show there's not really that racial. There is kind of that racial tension going on, but there aren't a ton of African American characters. There is kind of this Al Sharpton like character in one of the seasons, but really when it comes to like the actual wars that happen, it's either within their own family or it's with New York. So that's like another thing about why I wasn't super into the movie, because it was based in the 70s, and I remember there are parts in the show where Paulie would be like, I survived the 70s by like the skin of my nuts when the Columbos were going at it. So I was like, oh, like I'm gonna see some cool, the New Jersey mob versus the New York mob, but really it wasn't any of that. It was really these New Jersey gangsters versus African American gangsters, which just wasn't what I was expecting.
No, but in itself, they almost open it up to be an entirely like I could see them doing that as a spin-off show, because I fact checked this, and Screen Rant and other sources have said like Harold is not in the series at all. So this is the introduction to him to the franchise. So you could see if they wanted to continue his storyline at all, they could kind of just like go from this point of history onwards
They could.
and like reconnect the dots and almost have, crossover characters come on if this gets enough success to merit a series. But I'm kind of there with you. I really enjoy the show. The movie was really good for different reasons. The show was good. It's not as much of a favorite of mine. It doesn't seem to be something I'd go back and rewatch for the same reasons, just because it does have such a different tone, and it is a very like heavy movie and less of, getting that kind of equally balanced episode that you would get from The Sopranos, which you can kind of tell it's because there's it's a team of very strong writers, and it's kind of like how they split up like Beatles songs, where there's the Paul McCartney and then there's the John Lennon, and the light and the dark equally each other out, and you get this really nice thing. This movie was definitely feeling more like in the dark. And I'm thinking some of the other writers that are known for having more comedy in their series, you're kind of like, you guys were probably balancing out this head writer's vision and adding these other kind of elements to create this very multi-dimensional show.
So they said
oh yeah, continue.
They said Terrence Winter really was like the comedy element of the show.
Makes sense.
And they may do another movie. Ooh. And Terrence Winter might be a part of it.
Wow.
So
we go.
The thing is, I could watch another movie of this, and I'm not like bummed about the movie. I'm really happy that the movie was a thing, because I think it's just made people more into the show. And I would definitely see another movie. I think they got Dicky Moltisanti out of the way, and they could do some more development on like Tony. Because I think Tony in like the late 70s and 80s up to that point, like him beginning in the mob, would be really interesting.
It would really be interesting, and hopefully executed much more to the audience's liking than the likes of the Anakin turning to the dark side saga. I would love to see Tony's, because you can tell he doesn't really fully want to be involved, but he's a little bit tempted in this movie. It'd be interesting to have them in 1 to 2 movies have that shift of him being like, I'd like to see one where he's fully fighting against it, and then one where it's kind of him falling into it completely.
Yeah, one thing they did do in the movie that I thought was kind of funny is they're talking about like Tony's future. This is when he shot like the gun through her beehive hairdo.
Yeah, that was
Remember? That part
gnarly.
was intense.
Yeah.
But they were talking about like Tony's future, and they talked about him selling patio furniture. And that's something Tony says in the show all the time. Like he always says, like, maybe I'd be a rebel if I was selling patio furniture in my family. And like I thought that was a cool little reference to the show.
Well, it's his mom trying to get him out of it because she's like, he could
Yeah.
easily work for my brother instead of working for everyone else.
Yeah. I liked Tony's dad too. I wish I had seen more of him too.
Oh yeah, Johnny Soprano. Because yeah, I read on the wiki that he's really only seen through flashbacks because he passes away before the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
He
he
was a
went
cool
to
addition.
jail. And he went to jail for 4 years in the movie. So
Right.
like,
And
he
in the
just kind of
movie, he
wasn't
seems
around.
more chill. On the show, he's kind of depicted
He didn't seem like
like,
the best father in the
yeah,
movie.
he didn't, but he seemed worse on the show. Like the flashbacks they had on the show
They had him
definitely
like
make the
cutting people's
dad.
hands off and stuff.
Yeah, and he was also just very absentee, which he kind of obviously was in the
Was.
movie as well. And you do look at the mom and go like, "Oh, you have a lot of stress." But then you remember in the show, she also like turns on Tony, and you're just like, "This family,
Yeah.
man."
They're
See,
a
like,
weird family.
but that's kind of like why you like watching the show is like the family dynamics are really interesting, and you kind of never know when someone's gonna turn on someone and and forgive them and whatever and all this stuff. And in this show, everyone doesn't seem as like interconnected where there's like a tug on the heartstrings if they had to like go against someone. It seems like people are really easy to just like burn that bridge, like cut that
Yeah,
cord. They're a lot
there's
more like cold-hearted because like on the show you watch it because you're like the camaraderie, like the buddies. They all seem like,
yeah,
with the exception of like the people who evidently like, towards the end, maybe less buddies. But like there's a good part in the middle where like they're all just, enjoying each other's company. There's like clearly the A team and the kind of worse bad guys.
yeah.
and and then slowly, everyone kind of becomes problematic in their own way. But I think in the movie you kind of look at it and it does really just seem like everyone is the worst and
Mhm.
no one is really like the redeemable, like, oh, maybe they'll figure themselves out, except for maybe, the guy in jail. He seems to kind of have
He
some.
seemed to be rehabilitated a little
He's
bit.
testing
It seemed
music.
like jail worked for him.
Yeah, it did,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Another theory I like is I think the best scenario for Tony would have been he goes to jail for like 5 years. 5 years in jail, and then he like exercises, gets healthy, completely rehabilitates himself, and then, gets out of jail, goes straight.
That would be interesting as well. Like seeing him in an
Or
office job and just like how he handles those situations would be
yeah.
really funny in
But one
almost
problem,
a Gretzko like way,
yeah.
except for you just kind of be worried about what do you do? Like, are you gonna do
Well,
karaoke or are
one
you gonna
problem
like
is
go crazy?
so in the show you have characters like Phil Leotardo and Richie Aprile who are mobsters who did time, and then they come back and the mob isn't how they remember it and they're just bitter. So like I'd be curious to know what would happen to Tony if he actually did go to jail. Like would he rehabilitate himself and maybe be better, or would he just come back and be super bitter and be a psycho like Phil Leotardo,
Yeah,
you
or
know,
like Dickie. Yeah.
or Dickie or
Yeah, it's hard to say on that one. They did a good job with leaving the ending of the show open to interpretation, though. The main ending you're thinking of is the reason that it blacks out is because he's dead. But,
yeah.
you could think of it as he goes into a coma and is unconscious or something if it wasn't fatal or something
Yeah,
like that. And then
or
they
it's
leave room for these kinds of scenarios.
yeah, or it's basically just saying if you're Tony Soprano and you're out with your family, you might get shot in the head, you might get shot in the face. Like he
That's
just
just everyday life. And
he
I
just
mean,
has a
that's,
he has a piano over his head wherever he goes. Like,
yeah. And that's how they ended this movie too. It was like
yeah,
Christmas Day, and that guy Dickie got shot in the head. Like, just on his way, like literally in his driveway, which that one was extra cruel too. I was like, this movie, man, the whacks were just like,
I
oh,
also I also thought I heard
they're so bad. I mean, they're always bad, but
I also
these
thought
were like another level bad.
yeah, I also kind of thought I heard Polly over like when Junior's on the phone and is like, "Oh, it's done," and they're talking about the whacking of Dickie. I thought that was Polly on the phone, so I'd be curious to know if like
Mm.
Polly played any role in Dickie going.
It's interesting because it all stayed a secret, and there's a certain point where they decide to tell Chris it was a cop instead
The
of one
thing
of their
is,
own.
I should have known though because in the show they're always just killing each other. It's
Yeah,
never
the
what they
cops never
say it
get
is.
them.
Yeah, and that's like another part of the show that David Chase said he really liked about the show is anytime anyone says something, oftentimes it means the opposite. And he said it
Mm.
was really fun to write characters like that because they're always just anything they're saying, it literally means the opposite every time.
They contradict themselves.
Yeah, because that's how like when people talk, they really don't ever say what they mean. And then the added benefit of the show was Tony could go to therapy, and then you actually would be able to see what he was thinking
Right.
sometimes,
Right.
but he would even lie in therapy. So
I think that is probably a good way of, tying up the strength of the show and maybe one of the weaknesses of the movie is because in the show, they're able to, yeah, show Tony's
you can put
like
it on
kind
this.
of like vulnerable thoughts
Well,
and
yeah.
Yes, you
feelings.
can. Because he's in therapy and Dickie's not. Like you can't know what Dickie's thinking when Dickie does something.
It's
You
interesting
know.
because the entire premise of the show was based around the therapy aspect of it. Not to mention
Yeah.
this book Disney wore every week, but as it is a good telling of a lot of the entertainment histories, recent history, a recent era of its history, there is a bit in The Sopranos being developed. And being developed for Fox, and it basically started with David Chase, if I can remember this anecdote
Is
right.
this your factoid
Yes, this is my
of
Yes.
the?
single factoid. Yeah, is that yeah? So David Chase was basically writing shows for Fox, and
Mhm.
one of the execs over there basically like totally tore him down over one of the scripts he gave him, and he's like, "Hey, you can do better than this. Here's
Mhm.
some ideas I have." And one of them is this idea, like what if you had this kind of mobster? It was like this
Yeah.
weird kind of like twist on a standard crime premise. And David Chase took 2 weeks and he wrote this incredible script, and Fox ended up passing on it, and luckily we got it over at HBO where it was able to become what it was. But yeah, it's interesting because the entire show was kind of formed around that kind of like human nature of like, how do you see this crime boss? How do you
Yeah.
see this guy through this human lens?
And it's some of it is David Chase because David Chase had been in therapy for a long time, and Livia Soprano, the mom, like that's based on his mom.
Right,
Like
right.
he would say like that's my mom,
Oh my
and
god.
like people would always went like I guess his wife David Chase's wife would say you need to make a series about your mom, and that was part of
Interesting.
the idea like, oh, why don't you do a series about a TV producer with a crazy mom? It's like, oh, well, that's boring. How about I do a mobster with a crazy mom? And then he's in therapy because of because of how he feels about his mom.
Oh my god.
And that's how we got to this show and movie today. Daniel, let's bring us home. Let's let's wrap up this great episode on the Many Saints of Newark.
couple things, just in the chat tonight. James Gandolfini was almost Steve Carell's replacement on The Office, says
Wow.
BMac. There was an SNL skit, says Just the Facts, about a mob boss coming back after prison to a woke mob. Bill Burr played the old mobster. That is a recent skit. I have seen that.
That's hilarious.
And yeah, that was this week's Primetime Party Time. Thank you for joining us. The show could not have been made without the following amazing people. We're talking our artwork. It was done by Fen. Find her at Fenelata on Instagram. Theme song under us done by Jay Wright. Find him at jwrightmusic.com. Website with thanks to Coco. Production manager is BMac. And thank you, Sean, for coming on, guest starring, and talking about
thank you for
the best show,
having me.
The best performance, the best character in television. I am actually super, super stoked that we got to kind of get this in the catalog. So yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Yes, thank you.
Catch next week's Primetime Party Time here on ptptshow.com Monday, 9, I think. I don't know. Or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
I like how James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, was your mom's on-screen crush.
Yeah, that's what
It's
I
a
always
funny
thought was
one.
weird. I went to dinner with
Oh, that's right.
Meadows' roommate, the one who was all depressed. My neighbor dated she's an actress now, Ari Grainer.